Sasha. Welcome in. You're the head of content and creative at Charlie Oscar, a marketing science powered agency, and we'll get to that. And you work with some of the biggest global brands like Gymshark, Different Dog, and Flow. And recently, you've been smashing it with influencers, particularly, and that is the focus of this conversation today. But before we dive into it, I want to ask you. What has your journey been like? What is like your background? And tell us a little bit more about your current role at Charlie Oscar.
Yeah, of course. So I actually started my career in pure creative agencies back in Australia, working with very, very big sort of clients on big creative campaigns. I was working across Reebok, Pernod Ricard, Mercedes Benz, really, really big brands, which was really, really fun because we got to do really big creative work for them. And then what was really interesting is that influencers were always sort of integrated within that, but it wasn't called influencer marketing. It was
Mhm.
actually also just sort of a way to get relevant talent into campaigns. Like, for example, when working with Reebok, we were actually doing paid partnership ads all the way back, I want to say almost like 8 to 7 years ago, without actually really knowing it. We were getting influencers, putting them into Reebok photo shoots and then running them as paid ads. And then they were also running organic content as well. So it's quite interesting because we were just sort of doing what we knew would work, but it wasn't really, I think, officially called influencer marketing or partnership ads, etc. From a performance point of view. So it came from like a creative lens of how to actually make the work better and have more depth. So after that sort of journey of working with large brands, I got kind of, I guess, an itch to work with startups. I really wanted to sort of get my teeth into that sort of, I guess, D2C scene, which was booming at the time. I was obsessed with the brands like Glossier, Away. I just thought what they were doing was so interesting because I think they were taking a lot more creative risk. And I think once you work with really large companies and brands, as a creative and a strategist, which was my role within those agencies, you do get a little bit sort of, I think, beaten down with potentially those ideas getting diluted because you have to go through so many different hurdles and, um, you know, loopholes with those brands to get things across the line. So I really loved what those sort of startups were doing because their creative work at that time was sort of like the piece de resistance in a way. So decided to go startup side. I then also had the itch to live across the world in the UK. So I decided to kind of do a big double life change and career switch. Moved to London and I started working at a D2C women's health business. And that was also when COVID hit. So it was fabulous timing to move my life across the world. But I then worked within that business as their brand and marketing manager. So it was my first sort of in-house role. And I learned so much. It was very much kind of a formative experience of then actually understanding the performance marketing side of things. Because I think when you're in a creative agency, you are so sort of focused on the creative work, you deliver that work, and you're not actually usually held responsible for how it performs or what the ROI of that campaign was. So it was a huge learning curve. It was the first time I even heard what CAC meant. I was like, what are you talking about? So it was a really formative experience because it really sort of, I think, opened my eyes to actually the inner workings of a brand and how to get things across the line. And also, I think the age old debate of brand versus performance, that really, really came to light. And I was like, whoa, this is actually a huge challenge. So learned a lot there at that business. And then after a couple of years, I started to get the itch again to go back to agency. I was still very sort of interested in the startup space, and sort of how those brands were also getting funding and investment, because I also was very exposed to that within my role at the startup. So I then came across Charlie Oscar And I was obsessed with what Charlie Oscar was doing because originally we were actually a investment business, but our model was that we would invest in startups and brands, but then also, I guess, almost incubate them. So we would have a team of consultants across data science, marketing, growth, brand, and we would then be deployed or on hand for those businesses to help grow. So joined Charlie Oscar, we did some incredible work with a brand called Different Dog as one of our first investments. And I very much sort of leaned in to help them with influencer marketing. And over the years, that model, we decided to we found that businesses were really actually more interested in the consultancy side of what we were doing as opposed to the investment side. So we decided to follow the market and go, you know what, let's actually just switch to an agency model. So I was back in agency land again. And due to my work with Different Dog and all of the learnings we had with how to actually use influencers to grow a business, both from a brand point of view and a performance point of view, I then went on to head up the influencer department at Charlie Oscar, which is kind of what we are today. So we've got marketing science as our sort of foundation of the business that runs through everything, which we can talk a little bit more in detail later. And then that filters through into the agency services of influencer, creative content, paid media, and also overall just growth strategy. So it's been a really fun journey, and we are now sort of fully fledged, I guess, within the creative space of working with multiple different companies and brands to I guess kind of ensure that influencers can be a channel that can live on its own, not just as a brand channel but also a performance channel.
Absolutely. I absolutely love that. I think what an interesting trajectory from like a big brand like Reebok and then coming to modern big brands like Gymshark and Different Dog. Awesome. I think we'll touch upon a lot of different things that you mentioned. But starting with like when brands approach you, do they already have like an influencer strategy in place or at least an understanding of the channel, or like you or they come with like a pain point and you have to guide them there? What are the trigger points or pain points that other brands should probably look out for to know that, okay, it's time to add influencers to the mix?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, definitely because of our roots as a investment business. First and foremost, in the early days, a lot of the clients we would work with were startups or scale up businesses. So a lot of the time, it was more so we know influencers is a channel we should activate, but we can't prove that it will actually move the bottom line. So it's unmeasurable, essentially. So that was sort of the one main pain point. But as we've grown and started to work with more mid-sized and bigger businesses, it's actually who already know that influencer is a channel that they should be using. A lot of the time, the pain points are either they are still maybe not measuring it properly, and it's more so actually just a pain point of we need to understand how much value it's driving so we can just invest more and have that confidence. Or secondly, they might be doing loads of influencer work. And it actually just more needs structure and scale to keep going. So then we can be deployed into that business to help scale that channel and ensure that it is more of a full funnel strategy as opposed to just living on social.
That makes a lot of sense, that different size of brands or like the revenue that you're at would dictate the pain point around a channel. That makes a lot of sense. Across your conversations with these brands, what is like, let's say, the top 3 or 5 most common misconceptions around influencer marketing? Is it more to do with the way they run it, like operations, or is it like a mindset shift that you have to do with these brands?
I would say the top sort of, I think, challenge is the mindset shift. I think influencers has always been something that is sort of just sectioned off into the world of organic social, or it's seen as a brand only channel. And you maybe, again, historically, typically just lived in the PR sort of bucket. But we very much go in, and I guess our main sort of mission is to go into these businesses and prove that it's, yes, a brand channel, but also a performance channel, and probably one of the biggest growth levers for a business today, no matter what size business you are. So it's setting them up internally with the right measurement systems and frameworks to be able to go to the board or senior leadership with the right numbers that they care about to prove that the channel is working. And then secondly, structure and strategy internally as well. So I think a lot of influencer strategies, there's a lot of, I think, pain points around, how do we actually make this a channel for the long term, as opposed to maybe a month by month strategy where you're kind of just going with your gut and testing and experimenting. It really needs long-term thinking to ensure that the channel can provide consistent consideration and impact for the business over time.
Yeah, like the mindset shift is something that we've also realized is like a pattern across brands. Even on the internet, when you like open LinkedIn, you see influencer marketing is dead or it's not going to work anymore, and this and that. It's very funny. And agree to your point. Talking about like measurement. So again, through your conversations, is it that brands lack the basic like understanding of how to measure success, or do they have something in place but it's not right? Like, where does Charlie also come in and say, okay, this is what you're doing wrong? How does that look like in your conversations?
Yeah, I think it really actually is more a industry and channel
Mm-hmm.
problem. I think for influencers, it's been obviously around for decades in just very different forms that maybe we just didn't realize. Similar to what I kind of said earlier about,
Yeah.
almost 10 years ago in creative agencies, we were doing influencer marketing, but we just didn't really know that
Yeah.
that's what we were really doing in. um, but I think the influencer space and industry has moved so quickly and innovated so quickly, probably in the last, I would say, 5 years from like a tech point of view, especially with, platforms like Saral, but also just SaaS in general. So it's been able to analyze posts and provide data on engagement rates, impressions, reach, etc. But I think the innovation really stopped there for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of brands unfortunately got kind of stuck in this system where when it came to the measurement of their work, they only really had vanity metrics to play with. And that definitely worked for a while. And in some businesses, that works. That is the sort of metrics that they can go off, and that's great. But as businesses mature, they need to really show where every dollar is going, what that's then returning to the business. And vanity metrics just don't cut it in that way. But then the industry just didn't really have anything available. It hadn't innovated in so long. So when at Charlie Oscar, that was sort of the biggest challenge and pain point I wanted to set out to solve, because I saw, again, when we were working with more scale up startup businesses, where that measurement is so important to ensure that they can have clear ROI, there just wasn't anything there. So I worked with Dan, who's our co-founder and head of marketing science, and he has spent his entire career helping businesses understand the value of their marketing mix, and specifically through MMM. So we kind of came together and joined forces, and we created obviously Compass, which is our main sort of marketing science measurement option within the business. But how can you then actually feed influencer data into those models, which technically what hadn't really been done before? It's a form of measurement that's been around for years, but influencers were never really included within that conversation. It was your more traditional channels. So we kind of just realized, well, let's use the tech that we have today, which can capture all of that data and measure it as if it were, an out of home channel or a paid media channel. And what we started to see was that 80% of influencer value is indirect, and wouldn't have been captured if it wasn't included within the models, or measured in that way. That 80% would have been reattributed to another channel. But the theory and I guess kind of common sense of that conversation is that, well, even if it was reattributed to another channel, influencers still directed people to that, to convert. So it was super, super almost just groundbreaking. We were like, oh my gosh, like this, influencer marketers or brand marketers have been, at a disservice for so long with what they had available to them to measure influencers. So we started obviously applying that theory and including influencer data into all models for our clients. And again, we have been able to prove that, 80% of that value is typically missed. So we can capture that 80% and actually then understand right down to a revenue level how much revenue influencer marketing is providing to a business, which is game changing, because then you actually can then understand, okay, I can now actually fight for more budget to put into this channel, or you can also then use that to then optimize influencers as if it were a paid media channel. So we can actually break down that data to a super, super granular level, which is my favorite part. And we can actually start to understand, okay, what niches work best and drive the most uplift in that revenue, what content formats work best, what platform works best, what size of influence. You can literally go as detailed as you want if you have the right amount of data. And then from those breakouts, you can then actually understand how to then optimize or guide your strategy moving forward, as opposed to, again, kind of just using these vanity metrics that kind of you have to take with a pinch of salt sometimes. So that's been super, super game changing to create that.
Yeah.
And offer that to our clients, because it really kind of allows influencers to stand as its own mature channel, even though it's been seen as this sort of new risky channel for so long. Is right there beside some of the channels that usually typically brands funnel the most investment into.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you touched upon that. We did an entire session with you and Dan on measurement, attribution, ROI, all the big scary words that we run away from. And I'm gonna link the video somewhere in the description or somewhere on the screen for everyone who's watching this to go check that out as well. You mentioned that, okay, it did the campus conversation, did this tool help you deal with difficult clients who are like skeptical about this channel as well? How do those conversations go? Like, what is like the process that you take up? Do you show that, like, do you input the numbers and show it to them, or you have to like sit them down and tell them, okay, this is how other brands are doing and this is what you're missing? Like a general overview of how these conversations go.
Yeah, I think it really depends, because I think, again, MMM has been a form of measurement for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So for some businesses, they know what MMM is, or they've used it, or again, some bigger brands that we work with, they might actually already have their own MMM running in the background.
Mm-hmm.
But that then the education piece actually comes from, have you included your influencer data into those models? If so, why not? And we then obviously can help and consult them on how to acquire the right data to then feed into those models.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think the second one is, some people just don't know what MMM can provide to a business. They're very much stuck in last click. A lot of our clients, come to us because they, for so long as a business, have been measuring their entire business on last click and influence as well. So, and it also with influencers, kind of going back to that vanity metric conversation, when it comes to last click, they've mainly just been looking at codes and links, which again doesn't show the full picture.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the two sort of, I guess, very broad buckets that people do fall into. So either
Makes
we
sense.
consult on how to include influencers into their measurement frameworks, so they can actually see what's working, or secondly, it's a big education piece on what MMM is, similar to our webinar that we did with Dan. And then creating bespoke models for our clients. And I think when clients might get a little bit skeptical is potentially just, if we're kind of building the model, and showcasing the value of influencers, and we're executing influencers, you know,
Mhm.
they could say, oh, but like, is that marking your own homework? But it's not, because to create an MMM model and include influencers into the mix and understand its value, you have to measure everything else. It's not a
Yeah.
measurement frame that you can just put one data input into. You have to have everything. So even if, just say, we were executing for a client and maybe the influencer results weren't that great, we
Mm.
can't talk about it. We are extremely honest, and that's not a bad conversation. That's actually a great conversation, because it means, okay, well, that's a great learning of what we did. If it didn't work well, what is the next optimization to make it even better? But that happens very rarely.
Nice. Why do you think like the last click attribution framework does the most damage? Like, is it undervaluing the creators or like the type of content or like formats or just something entirely else? What is like the most damaging part of doing last click attribution?
Mm. I think the most damaging part is that it doesn't match up to just the real consumer behavior of how people interact
Mm,
with influencers. I
correct.
think, yes, it makes sense that, you know, maybe for some brands or some products and some influencers, you know, running a code or a link to a discount, it will work really well. We hear stories of it all the time of, you know, we paid this influencer this much, then they provided this much revenue through a code. It was crazy successful, which is fantastic. But then it kind of devalues maybe everything else that they're doing. And you have to understand the consumer behavior of people on social to know that people are scrolling. They might see a code or a link or an influencer just promoting a particular product, but they're going to buy days, weeks later, potentially through a completely different channel. But they were still influenced. And that's what direct attribution can't capture, is that behavior, which is common sense when you think about it. It's just the theory of how people buy. So you need to kind of treat it more as, again, that awareness channel as opposed to just a conversion channel. And I think that's where, you know, proper strategy comes into place. So having those right internal structures. So, you know, we work with clients on, okay, how can you actually fill and create a influencer strategy that does touch on every stage of the funnel. So for conversion, it's most likely an affiliate strategy, which is very, you know, link and code focused, and driving revenue directly, which is great. It's also ensuring that if you're doing, you know, mass seeding or mass gifting, using that content and milking it on all of your paid channels, that's where conversion happens. But also investing in the other sort of tiers of paid partnerships, ambassadors, etc., where you're not going to see that code return, especially with the budgets of, you know, how much you're paying those bigger talent on longer term contracts, unless they're known within the industry for being excellent at driving, you know, codes and clicks. But I don't think that's how you should be treating those partnerships anyway.
Yeah.
It's definitely a bigger, longer term play. So we very much help build those sorts of tiers and structures within a strategy. So you are hitting every stage within the marketing funnel or consumer discovery, because that's genuinely just how it works. If you
Yeah,
peel.
absolutely. I think I'm like the most ideal consumer for any brand out there because I'm like a 27-year-old woman with some money and whose life like is on the internet. So I get influenced almost every day, but it's very rare that I click on a link that an influencer has put out. Very rarely, right? But I'm always like that is like the first touch. I see something while endlessly scrolling on Instagram or TikTok. Um, yeah, again, like it's you're undervaluing the content, you're undervaluing such a like a modern channel for growth, right? So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for walking us through that. um if I can like take you back in time a little bit, talking about like compass and talking about tools at your disposal, when you went out looking for an influencer marketing platform, was there anything particular that you were hoping to achieve?
Yeah, I think especially kind of back in the early days where we were more so focused on scale up businesses, which required a lot of education on MMM and also a lot of buy-in to influencers as a channel. So one of the kind of best strategies in those scenarios for those businesses is mass gifting or mass seeding at scale. And to do that manually is just a no. No one wants to do that. I think if you're still
Yeah.
doing that, stop right now. And I've done it. I've done it before. That's again, you kind of go back in your career and see moments where, I was mass gifting at a completely manual level. But I think we knew that tech was at a place where it could help automate a lot of it or just make it a lot more efficient and faster. So when it came to those sorts of projects, it was very much about how can we source influencers at scale. If you're gifting in the hundreds or the thousands, you can't be just going through the social platforms one by one and like manually scrolling. Respect to that, because you've got a great human filter, but I think it's how can you have a tool that can just make that process way more efficient based on the filters that you need to use, and then obviously apply a human filter once you actually have that curated sort of, I guess, list of results. So sourcing was a big one. Also the shipping of product as well. Again, we didn't really want to kind of go back to the old PR days where you're in a closet just packing boxes one by one and then going to the mail room with a big bag and shipping them out. That again is not efficient. So we needed something that allowed us to connect with our clients, back end, so that we can just ship product out seamlessly. And then also I think another one was, outreach, comms, etc. How can we also make that a lot more efficient than just starting a new email and being addresses, etc. How can we also get that to an automated place? So that was really, really important. And then I also think as well, when you're doing that level of execution, how can you also automatically track content? That's a big one. Again, I look back on times where, we were screenshotting stuff and putting it into an Excel sheet, which is crazy to me. So yeah, it was very much sort of the operational element of being execute those campaigns efficiently. And then when it comes to more bigger paid campaigns, I think, especially with the rise of AI, those things are starting to also be automated, which is fantastic. And that's where we're spending a lot of our time at the moment with clients, where we are doing bigger campaigns, where how can we, be able to make the sort of low empathy areas of that process automated, whether that's, contracting still needs a human layer and expertise, but how to make that sort of process a lot easier. Also, when it came to, content reviews and just general campaign management, there's so much opportunity there. So yeah, those were it's more so the operational side of things that require was where our focus was when it came to the tech stack.
It makes sense, because the beauty of being a marketer is that you can, be creative, and that's like the love for marketing comes from, and you should let the boring admin work to like a software. So that makes a lot of sense. Was there like a particular reason why Saral felt like the right fit for you versus the other platforms that you evaluated? Did it like match your must-haves list?
I think at the time, Saral was very much sort of a leader in the space when it came to being able to cover a lot of those admin steps within, especially the mass seeding campaigns. I think one of the best, I guess, elements of Saral was the shipping feature. That was, super, super innovative. And this is, again, going back like almost 4 years. So we've been working with Saral for a long time. So that might not be a feature that many people think is that exciting anymore. But at the time, it was really innovative. And then also, I think the collaboration with Saral as well around, because, it kind of felt like we were building together. And I think the, amount of support and I think openness around us providing feedback on the platform of what works, what doesn't, and I think you also built features for us at some points that weren't even available because we needed it. So all of those sorts of aspects, I think, really resonated with us, because a lot of the other sort of SaaS platforms at the time were very sort of just off the shelf, and
Mm-hmm.
that was it. And I think Saral was very much someone we aligned with, from a value point of view, of just people who are just as passionate and want to build something great, and work with us to make it happen. So it was also, yeah, from a values point of view, as opposed
Yeah.
to just what the product offers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those kind words. How has this like helped you with reporting, or what is like talking about like performance with your clients? What is like the most tangible impact that you've seen for a client, and for what, and for how Charlie Oscar operates? In terms of like impact, where has that shown up most? Like, yeah,
Yeah, I think definitely for brands who have never been able to get buy-in to influencers, and if we come on
yeah,
board, start executing, and then also using Compass to measure it, it's been so inspiring and rewarding to see, client teams actually be able to use those numbers and go, okay, what's next? We've got more investment. And, getting messages from clients saying, I've never had buy-in before. No one ever really believed in the channel. And Charlie Oscar has single-handedly allowed influencers to be seen as a respectable channel for the business. So that's been probably one of the biggest, I think, wins, is being able to actually just understand how this channel is affecting the bottom line of a business. I also think, secondly, a huge sort of insight, that has been super powerful, is not just looking at influencers as in silo in terms of what it's providing, but also the synergy impacts, which is something we also spoke about in the webinar, is this
yeah,
idea that all channels are working together. And when influencers is live, paid media works this much harder, or out of home works this much harder. And being able to show how it's all working as an ecosystem together, not just in silo, has been really exciting. So, and also seeing how influencers can then also infiltrate the other channels. So obviously, pulling influencer content and using it onto paid media channels has obviously been a massive topic for the past couple of years, and we have been doing that for years. We see upwards of almost 50% efficiency from a CPA or CAC point of view when we're
mhm,
using influencer clients within paid media. And Meta partnership ads is now one of the biggest sort of levers within all of our
yeah,
influencer strategies. TikTok Spark ads. We've also been doing lots of testing for the past couple of years on YouTube, whitelisting as well. And the efficiency there is also incredible. So being able to also show how influencers can help the other channels and make them more efficient has been a huge win as well.
absolutely. Halo effects, right? Like influencer content lifting paid media, brand search, even like retail sales on Amazon or everywhere else. It's just sort of everything just comes together, and you need to like zoom out and see the bigger picture, and not like get into like specifics. Okay, one post went out, no sales move, the channel is not working, influencer marketing is dead. I think that's the mindset shift that we spoke about. So thanks for explaining that so well. I think my last couple of questions. One would be, where do you see influencer marketing heading in the next, let's say, year or two, especially with everything that's changing with like algorithms and privacy laws and AI influences coming in, which I have very particular views about. But and with this like MMM model coming in, your Compass tool, how do you see? What do you see? Where do you see influencer marketing heading next?
Big question, but I love this question because I think what's really exciting is that, kind of similar to what I was saying before, where it felt like innovation kind of stalled for a bit within
Yeah.
influencer marketing. I think it's now on its next like era of just complete innovation, which is so exciting. And that innovation is coming from all different directions. I think from an AI point of view, operationally, massive upheaval in terms of how we operate, which is great. Um, AI influences, my opinion is, no.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
against it. I mean, not against it. I just think, it's a very, also, like, very passionate about this
Yeah.
topic, as you see, but my mind is racing. I think they're really interesting to experiment with and see how they land, or what they I think they will find a place, but I don't think it's going to overtake real human content. I think that's just
Absolutely.
never going to happen. But I do find it really interesting. I mean, I was scrolling on TikTok the other day, and there was a video, and it was very just sort of like a looping video and then copy overlay. And I was reading the copy, and then I went to the comments, and people were having these real genuine conversations and like trying to get the influencer to reply. And then I kept going through the profile, and I was like, there's something about this person that just doesn't seem real. I then was like, it's AI, but it was very good AI. But it was really alarming to me to see the amount of people in the comments who just hadn't clocked it yet.
Hmm.
And that's a space I'm really interested in, because I think when people start to actually not realize what's real, it sort of showcases, well, maybe it can work. So
Yeah.
I think that is going to be an interesting space just to see how it progresses and maybe what the place is for that. But I do think human real content
Yeah.
will reign supreme.
Yeah.
I also think when it comes to a content point of view, I think it's going to be more emphasis on longer form, entertainment focused pieces. I think we're already seeing that right now. It's growing massively in terms of brands investing in more so like influencer IP. So, how can we create TV shows or short form series on YouTube or TikTok that's either scripted or non scripted? I always talk about Tinder. I think it was last year, did their version of like Love Island, and it was a full
Yeah.
reality show. I think we're going to see much more of that, because I think, TikTok and Instagram short form, it's always going to have a place, but I think people really are starting to invest longer amounts of time of their attention to more entertaining pieces. We equally spend as much time on Netflix, as we do TikTok. So how can influencers start to infiltrate those spaces more traditionally? And then also, I think more brands are going to start, I think, collaborating with influencers on product. I mean, that's been happening since the dawn of time, right? But I think, especially in the US, you kind of start to see a lot of brands achieve massive growth targets with the backing of, the Alex Earls and Poppy. That's like an infamous story right now. So I think we're going to start to see a lot of brands invest more heavily in how can we actually co-create from the get-go,
Yeah.
which is going to also be really, really interesting. So lots of facets, I think, of the industry are going to change quite drastically, whether that's AI or just keeping up with how people are consuming content or how they want influencers to present themselves. Because more, I guess, quickly, influencers are really infiltrating traditional media spaces. So I think brands going to have to keep up with that. And again, not just rely on your typical organic social
Yeah.
channels.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you should leave AI work to make your, let's say, platform faster. And again, like talking about scaling and efficiency, like let AI handle those parts for you rather than the strategy or like AI influencers. I don't even want to get into it, honestly. I agree with you. Just know, at the base of it, it's like a relationship channel, like, right? Like between the influencer and the audience, and between influence marketer and the influencer, like both those dynamics are so human and rooted in that, organic like relationship. So it doesn't make sense to involve, how are you supposed to talk to an AI influencer? I don't know. I don't know how that works.
I
But
mean, something I always like to bring up in this conversation, something that I really love to bring up in this conversation around AI influencers, is that it's actually not that new. If you go
mhm,
back, it is about 8, maybe 7 years ago. There was Lil Michaela. I don't know if you know who that is. But she was the
no.
first virtual influencer. So she was massive. I think she was on covers of magazines. Like, it was just this sort of big, like, I think, cultural phenomenon.
Mhm.
Um, it was just really interesting and maybe just very novel. And, I think the longevity of Lil Michaela, it has lasted somewhat. I don't think she's not as forefront as she used to be. But I think, it really showcases maybe that timeline of just sort of novel to people not really caring.
Mm-hmm.
So AI influences, I don't think is actually that new, because we've had the virtual sort of era of people trying it out, but then people eventually they don't engage with it, or they don't find
Yeah.
it relatable. So I think AI influencers will have that same sort of trajectory of, there might be some that really stand out, or they execute in a really great way that's like funny or just interesting. Maybe they're not trying to them openly AI. I think that's maybe key,
Mm-hmm.
potentially. Maybe initial success is actually not trying to appear as something you're not. Um, and executing in a really interesting way. But I think eventually, people will get tired of that sort of the novelness of
Yeah.
it, and human content will reign supreme. So there will be a place. I just don't think I potentially maybe the conversation is actually no one's proved a successful model of AI influencers yet, which is
Yeah.
maybe a more optimistic view to have as opposed to hating on it. So maybe we'll take that route.
Um, where do you think this like the need or need comes from to have AI influencers? Do you think it's brands who want to like cut some costs here and there? And do you think like just like tying that into our conversation about ROI, do you think that is the genesis of AI influencers, or do you think it's coming from somewhere else?
I think it definitely comes from just a place, especially when you talk about maybe like content and UGC, more so for the bottom of the funnel. I
Hmm.
think it comes from a place of efficiency. Like I've already seen so much conversation of,
Yeah.
if you're trying to get UGC, don't bother with real people, just use AI influencers. And, some of the videos I've seen are pretty compelling. Um, I don't think it's perfect yet. I think maybe the scary thought is that it will get to a point where it's really realistic. Um, so it comes from an efficiency point of view, especially when it comes
Mm.
to the creative volume that brands need today, especially with the paid media algorithms and Meta. So it's just an efficiency thing. And then I think from a bigger paid partnership point of view, I don't think it will. I think brands will still kind of divert to the real sort
Yeah.
of human talent, unless it's a rebirth of like the Lil Michaela model, which was just super interesting and novel at the time. And she had
Yeah.
partnerships with Gucci and like all the luxury brands, which was cool. But yeah, and then I think, beyond just brands, um, and sort of that efficiency point of view, from a talent point of view, I think some are starting to look at it also maybe from like an efficiency point of view of,
Hmm.
I just create more content, and maybe having some sort of avatar or AI version of themselves will help with that.
Hmm.
But then I just don't think how I haven't seen a solution that makes AI sort of people, I think, real enough yet. It's still a little bit uncanny, the
Yeah.
result. Um, so it'll be interesting. I think that's almost like an unknown, in terms of where that will go. But I think from a UGC, more bottom of funnel UGC point of view for brands, it's efficiency of just
Yeah.
getting more out. Um, but yeah, I think we'll have to wait and see of whether we can start to actually produce content that does look real. Because I think, and whether brands are going to have to start, disclaiming that it's AI generated
Yeah.
as well, and how that affects performance. Because I think mine, as again, sort of someone who comes from more of a creative background and
Yeah.
values creativity a lot, I think, you know, it's scary to see where potentially the algorithms or just like the content feeds, what they're going to look like in a couple of years. There's a great report called The Sloppening. And I'm really scared around this idea that just AI slop is going to be absolutely everywhere. And But I think maybe that's also the challenge, is like if that is going to start to dominate the feeds, the opportunity for brands is actually how can you overcome the slop and actually be someone who disrupts the feed,
Yeah.
because creating is so interesting and great. So yeah, there's kind of, I guess, scariness and hesitation, but also I think you have to take that with more so, I guess, a positive view of, okay, there's a lot of opportunity here then. And I don't think true human creativity will never actually go away.
I love that. I think that is a very good note to end this conversation. It's been absolutely awesome. Sasha, thank you so much for your time. Absolutely awesome. I think solid insights. I loved it so much.
Cool.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, Sasha. Really appreciate
Perfect.
it.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye bye.